All right. Today we continue on learning about the Maccabees of old and how some things just never seem to change. We got to the end of chapter 2 in the first volume, but I want to back up and do something a little more in depth. So let's recap. Matityahu murdered a man who offered strange fire to Yahweh God. And a godless Gentile, he also killed a godless Gentile who was in his town to force all Jews to do the same. He was there to make all of the Jews sacrifice a pig and eat it. So he killed a Jew that did so, and he killed the man who was there to make everybody do the same. Not the best way to win friends, but it certainly influenced a whole lot of people. I helped myself out. See what I did there? I'm just saying. Anyway, in response to a Jew refusing to turn his back on his God, and for the crime of murder, the godless had now murdered many men, women, and children who did not defend themselves because the attack took place on the Shabbat. This is what happens when people who have no legitimate knowledge of the Torah decide to follow it. What I'm saying here is that if this group of people had asked a rabbi, Rabbi, should we kill people for offering strange fire to God and those who would make them do so? The answer would have been no. God takes care of things like that. He does not need our help. And secondly, the Torah never taught that the Jews could not defend themselves on the Shabbat. I mean, just a slight knowledge of what the Tanakh said would have told them that the Jews defended themselves on Shabbat. These people knew nothing about the Tanakh, yet they're trying to live by it. I'm thinking all of a sudden here. Now, going back to 39 in chapter 2, it says, Now when Matityahu and his friends understood hereof, they greatly mourned for them. And one of them said to another, If we all do as our brothers have done, and fight not for our lives in Torah against the non-Jews, they will now quickly root us out of the land. Here we see non-scholars, non-rabbim, non-rabbis in English, making decisions from that which seems right to them, rather than following God's law. Of course, in this case, the decision did in fact follow the law. But how much worse would this have been if they were in rebellion of God's law? Because they didn't do this because God's law said you could defend yourself on a Shabbat. They did it because they didn't want to die. That's two different things. Verse 41 said, At that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, Whoever shall come to make battle with us on the Shabbat day, we will fight against them. Neither will we die all as our brothers that were murdered in the secret places. Then came there to him a synagogue of Hasidim, who were mighty men of Yisrael, even all such as were voluntarily devoted. They were voluntarily devoted to the Torah. Also, all they that fled for persecution joined themselves to them and strengthened them. So you had people who lived by the Torah because they wanted to, and then you had people who came and decided to live by the Torah with these people because they were being slaughtered in the cities. Anyway, verse 44. So they joined their forces and smoked non-Torah observant, smote sinful men, as it says, in their anger. They killed them in their anger, or struck them anyway, in their anger, and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the non-Jews for help. Now the Jews are killing Jews because the Jews aren't living up to their standards. Then Matityahu and his friends went round about and pulled down the altars. And what children soever they found within the coast of Israel uncircumcised, those they circumcised valiantly. They pursued also after the proud men, and the work prospered in their hand. So they recovered the Torah out of the hand of the non-Jews and out of the hand of the kings. Neither suffered they the non-Torah observant Yehudi, the sinners, because you had to be a non-Torah observant Jew to be called a sinner in their day. They didn't allow them to triumph, it says. They took the Torah, they recovered the Torah out of the hands of the non-Jews. That's interesting because it already said that the non-Jews tore it up and burned it, if you recall. So when they're saying non-Jews here, they've made that distinction. You didn't come with us out into the wilderness. You aren't living according to the Torah. You are a non-Jew. They would be the only people left with Torah, to say it properly. They would have been the only people left with these things. Just throwing that in there. 49. Now when the time drew near that Matityahu should die, he said to his sons, now has pride and rebuke gotten strength, and the time of destruction, that's a title. Remember, we've already talked about the something of desolation.
Consecration, desolation, abomination.
Abomination of desolation. These are two new titles that mean exactly the same thing. The time of destruction is the abomination of desolation, and the wrath of indignation is the abomination of desolation. By the way, Matityahu is wrong. This is not the abomination of desolation. But it had to have seemed very apocalyptic to him at the time and to everybody else, because they're slaughtering the babies in the streets. So they thought that the time had come, but it had not. Verse 50, now therefore, my sons, be you zealous for the Torah, and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. Matityahu was raised up in a time when Hellenization was beginning to take deep root among God's children. He obviously took most things literally, which is no doubt why he believed himself justified in murder, destruction of other people's property, i.e. tearing down their altars, and forcing circumcision on other people's children as acceptable behaviors, which they are not, but he thought they were, obviously. Thus, it is most likely that when he told his boys to lay down their lives, he meant that they should die, a physical death. Had a Jewish Rabbi said these very same words, it would have been an admonishment to them that they should spend every extra moment they have in life studying and implementing Torah observance in their life, in their personal lives, and teaching others, especially their children, to do the exact same thing. Let's listen to what he said. It's not bad advice. Now, therefore, my sons, be you zealous for the Torah, and give your lives, don't die, give everything you got in life to the Torah, and for the covenant of your fathers. You see how that would have been different had he been a rabbi and not a Hellenized Jew? Anyway. 51, call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in their time. So shall you receive great honor and an everlasting name. So now we are going to find out just how little this man actually knew about the Word of God. Verse 52, it says, was not Abraham found Torah observant in temptation? Was he not found faithful in temptation? Faithful in their time was Torah observance. So was he not found Torah observant in temptation? And it was imputed to him for forgiveness. Do you guys already see a problem here? There is nothing anywhere in the entire Jewish Bible that says anything about Abraham being faithful to God in his temptations. However, there is a place where the Hebrew Bible tells us that Abraham gave into his temptations and fathered a child. And then if that wasn't bad enough, he kicked out his mistress and her baby to go die in the cold. Here's the thing. Abraham did not go around tearing down altars. He did not go around circumcising other people's children, valiantly or otherwise. What made Abraham righteous was his lifelong obedience to his covenant with God, because this happened at the end of his life, him being counted righteous, not at the beginning of his life. It was not his ability to force someone else or everyone else around him to be Torah observant. You see the difference between Matitya's approach and Abraham's approach? Abraham made mistakes. Yes, he did. And I will never agree that he was supposed to kick his concubine and the child he fathered with her out into the cold the way he did. When God said he was going to take care of him, I really don't think that's what that meant. But anyway, that's for another time. Verse 53, Joseph, in the time of his distress, kept the commandment and was made Lord of Mitzrayim, which is also known as Egypt. The Hebrew Bible does not tell us that Joseph kept the commandments in his distress or at any other time. In fact, it indicates otherwise. But it does tell us that he tried to help God out when he was in jail via his attempt to get a prisoner to pass on a good word for him. Doesn't sound like someone who trusts God to me. Joseph became the ruler of Mitzrayim because he was chosen by God before he was born to do so. If anything can be said, it would be that God completed his plan for Joseph in spite of Joseph, not because of him. 54. The Nechas, our father, in being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting kahunat. He was the big kahuna. It's an everlasting priesthood. Anyway, this story is most likely where Matitya developed his belief that it was acceptable to kill someone for their Torah rebellion. In the story, the children of Yisrael had been worshiping idols with the women from Moab. Because of this sin, and no doubt the fact that this happened not too very long after the golden cow incident, God told Moshe to have the ringleaders put to death. But before this could be carried out, Phinehas, being overcome with zeal, killed a Jewish man and a Moabite woman who were entering a tent to worship her God. The lesson in the story was not that men should kill the non-observant for their sin. Instead, the lesson was supposed to be that God forgives Yisrael for her sin, even if there is only one zealous Jew passionately serving him. It only takes one. Wow, did he ever miss a good lesson? 55. Yehoshua, for fulfilling the word, was made a judge. Caleb, for bearing witness before the congregation, received the heritage of the land, which Yehoshua also received. I'm just throwing that in there. Anyway, actually, God said the following. None of the men that ascended from Mitzrayim, remember that's Egypt, from 20 years and up will see the land which I swear to Abraham, Yitzhak, and to Yaakov, because they were not faithful. It's an idiom. It says, because they not fulfill, they following. In Hebrew, that's how that would come. It translate very literal in English. It would say, because they not fulfill, they following. What it means, because it's an idiom, because they were not faithful. Nobody over the age of 20 that left Egypt was going to walk over into the promised land. None of them. And then in the next verse it says, except Caleb. You guys know him as Caleb. But Caleb, son of Yefuneh, the Kenizi, then it would have said, Ve Yehoshua ben Nun, or son of Nun. For they were fulfilled they following. They were faithful. So faithfulness, living according to the Torah, got those two men into the promised land. Sin kept all of the other men past the age of 20 out, Moshe included. Here's a short article I wrote some time ago. If you ask 10 Jews what it means to be a Jew, you should prepare yourself for an all-nighter. For centuries now, Jews have been attempting to define and redefine the meaning of what it is to be a Jew. Israeli Jews say that American Jews are not real Jews. American Jews say that's a bunch of nonsense. After all, if you are raised in Judaism, you are a Jew. And every Jew knows that those who claim to be Jewish but believe in Jesus are not Jews at all, right? There are Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic, Reformed, Conservative, Observant, and, of course, non-observant Jews. The majority of Israeli Jews claim to be atheist. They don't believe in God at all. And then there are all the other fragmented groups calling themselves Jews for one reason or the other. Is Judaism a bloodline or is it a religion? If Judaism is a bloodline, how do we explain black Ethiopian Jews, pale, white-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jews, and olive-skinned, brown-eyed, black-haired Jews? Some would say they are from the different tribes. But how would that be possible since all 12 tribes came from the same mother and father? The word Jew comes from the Hebrew word Yehudi. You hear Judy in that? Yeah. It is a combination of two words. The first is the shortened version of God's proper name, in other words, Yah. The second word is from the Hebrew word Hud, which means doer or follower, imitator. Together, the meaning becomes follower of Yah. In other words, doer of the Torah. Those who live out their lives in obedience to the Torah are Yehudim, Jews, while those who fit Torah into their lives are not Jews, regardless of their bloodline. The father of Judaism, the guy Avraham, wasn't even born a Jew. He was a Chaldean. Rahav the Ruth, Rahab and Ruth, they say Ruth, were not born Jews. What made these Goim, these Gentiles from other nations and their descendants, Jewish? Well, they all converted from a lifestyle of disobedience to the Torah, which if you're not Torah observant, you're living a lifestyle of disobedience to the Torah. It's called sin. To a lifestyle of living according to Torah, which is also called righteousness. In the end, Yehoshua did not become a judge, and Caleb did not get to go into Israel because they did some extraordinary thing in some special moment. If these or any other persons received something special from God, it was because of their Torah observance, or because God chose them, for reasons only known to God. The idea that God rewards, I wrote rewards. that one made me stumble. The idea that God rewards men for their deeds stems from the idea that men can manipulate God. I gave $10, so God owes me 100. See, that's God manipulation. I did these 4 mitzvah according to the Torah. God owes me. No, that's God manipulation, and it does not exist except in people's minds. Verse 57, Matityahu went on to say, David, for being merciful, possessed the throne of an everlasting kingdom. The Bible tells us that Shlomo was the reason why David's throne was going to live on forever. Consider 1 Kings chapter 7. This particular translation was taken from the Jewish Study Bible that's put out by Oxford. We'll begin with verse 8. Further, say thus to my servant David, this said the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the flock, to be ruler of my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut down all your enemies before you. Moreover, I will give you a great renown, like that of the greatest men on earth. He's telling him you're not one of the greatest men on earth, but I'm going to give you that name like you were. Anyway, as if you were. Look, that's what it says. I will establish a home for my people Israel, and will plant them firm, so that they shall dwell secure and shall tremble no more. Evil shall not oppress them any more as in the past. Ever since I appointed chieftains over my people Israel, I will give you safety from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that he, the Lord, will establish a house for you. When your days are done and you lie with your fathers, in other words, when you're dead, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own issue, and I will establish his kingship. I will establish his kingship. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. His royal throne forever, not David's. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he does wrong, I will chastise him with the rod of men and the affliction of mortals. But I will never withdraw my favor from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed to make room for you. Your house and your kingship shall ever be secured before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Via your kid. To which David responded in a prayer. So we move to verse 18. What am I, O Lord God, and what is my family, that you have brought me thus far? Jumping to 28. And now, O Lord God, you are God, and your words will surely come true, and you have made this gracious promise to your servant. Last half of 29. For you, O Lord God, have spoken. May your servant's house be blessed forever by your blessing. This is yet another example of God picking someone and doing that which he, speaking of God, wants in spite of that person's failings. Where was the mercy of David? Because this is what Matityahu said. He has an everlasting kingdom because of his mercy. Where was his mercy when he was sleeping with another man's wife? Where was the mercy of David when he sent that woman's husband to the front lines to be killed in an effort to cover up the fact that he got that man's wife pregnant? Verse 58, Eliyahu, for being zealous and fervent of the Torah, was taken up into heaven. Let's talk about Eliyahu. I like this guy. He prophesied that the rains, the stuff that comes down from the air, the water, the rains would end until he commanded them to come back. He then went into hiding at a wadi until it dried up, because it's like a big ditch where there's water, until it dried up because of the lack of rain. Then he journeyed to another town where he found a widow woman gathering sticks so she could cook her last little meal before she and her son died from starvation, as there would be nothing to eat or drink after that meal. Eliyahu told that woman to do what she planned, but to give him a small portion of the bread and the water before she and her son had their last meal. In return for her obedience, her flour jar and her oil can did not run dry while he was with them, just as Eliyahu told her. However, she did not profess and believe that Eliyahu was a prophet with the word of Yahweh God in his mouth until Eliyahu raised her son from the dead. Typical. God sustains and provides for his children in the worst of times, and they still don't recognize the prophet of God even when he's staying in their guest room. When Eliyahu finally went back to command the rains to return, we call him Ahab these days, said to him. So now we're reading from 1 Kings 18:17, and this is my translation, of course, of the Hebrew. And it came to pass as Achav, that's the guy they call Ahab, saw Eliyahu, Achav said to him, "It is you who troubles Yisrael. You." I can relate to this one. The prophet of God, the guy who's just living out his life according to the Torah and teaching others to do the same, is now being blamed for that which only God can possibly do. You took the reins away from us. No, he didn't. Anyway, the next verse. And he, speaking of Eliyahu, and he responded to him, "I have not troubled Yisrael. It happened when you and your father's house forsook the mitzvot of Yahweh and went after Baalim." When you forsook, and it says mitzvot in Hebrew. That's very different than Devarim. Because if he forsook the Devarim, then you could say, you forsook the 10 Commandments, man. But since he used mitzvot, that's the 613 laws as they're known in Judaism. You forsook the whole book, dude. When you and your father forsook that thing and went after, it says Baalim. That's Baal in plural. When we look up the words Baal or Baalim, we are told that this was a specific god, and yes, there was an idol by that name. However, the Hebrew text of the Jewish Bible never used Baal as the name of the devil or of the supreme false god. The idea of a supreme false god came about during the early stages of Hellenization, and at the time of Yeshayahu, we're way before that. So this idea of basically that's the name of the devil, it comes with Hellenization of the Jewish world and has subsequently been pushed back into the wrong time period. Here the Hebrew Bible clearly uses this word to mean false idols. It's in plural. After the accusation by the king and then Eliyahu's answer, Eliyahu commanded that all the Jews be brought together at Mount Carmel, and that the 450 prophets, and in writing this down, the false prophets, I actually have spelled the word prophet, Profits, where when I talk about Eliyahu, it's spelled Proph, if you follow what I'm, anyway. I guess it'd be funnier if you could actually see it. So he's told everybody, bring all the children of Yisrael to Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. You guys know that's where the name Isabel comes from, right? Just throwing that out there. They eat at Jezebel's table. He wants them to come and make a sacrifice to their false idols. Then the king did what he was told, and the people were summoned. It's funny. The king did what he was told. Now, before we move on, we need to learn the meaning of two Hebrew words. One of them is posechim. Posechim. The root of that word is Pesach. You mean Passover? Yep. But this isn't the title. It's to Passover, to crossover. The grammar rule, when followed by the Hebrew word al, which it is in this case, it is to make room for anyone or anything. It's also to halt, to limp. And this is to halt. You got to go all the way back to the 1800s to understand what it meant. But it's to limp. to fluctuate from one to the other. Used in verse 26 of this very section we're reading, it's of the prophets of Baal jumping, in other words, limping from side to side. They're not really jumping. It's not like when you see a Christian church on TV and everybody's jumping up and down, with their hands beside them. I don't know what that's about. It's not like that, though. This is more like people limping from side to side, almost like they're in pain. All right? So there's your first word. Then the next one is ha-se'ipim. It's opposite sides, divided opinions. It's from se'ef, which is divided. In other words, a person of a divided mind who being destitute of firm faithfulness and persuasion as to divine things, is driven here and there. A doubter, a skeptic. It's from the root sa'af, which means to divide. So what I should say then is, Po sechim al shite ha se'ipim is a Hebrew idiom that means, how long will you be a skeptic? Meanwhile, back at Mount Carmel, all the Jews have arrived. So we pick back up with the words of Eliyahu in verse 21. And Eliyahu drew near to all the people and said, how long will you be skeptics? How long will you fluctuate between two minds? Literally. But so how long will you be skeptics? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if the idol is God, go after it. And the people were shamed by his words. And yes, the Hebrew text says they were shamed by his words. Your English translations never say that. That's 1 Kings 18:21. Think about it. If Yahweh is God, we should follow him, serve him, obey him, do what he tells us to do. Don't do what he tells us not to do, right? If the idol is God, we should follow it, serve it, obey it, do what it tells us to do. Don't do what it tells us not to do. Let me ask this. If mixing and matching, doing the Yahweh stuff and doing some pagan stuff and just, putting it all together, if that's fluctuating between two minds, wouldn't that be, at the very least, a mild form of schizophrenia? I'm just saying, just throwing it out there. All right, here's something fun. In the book of Yirmiyahu, that's Jeremiah to the uninitiated, chapter 10, verses 3 and 4 says the following. This is my translation of the Hebrew text. For the customs of the people are vain. For the trees of the forest do their hands cut down skillfully with an axe. For the customs of the people, I could have said this people, are vain. For the trees of the forest do their hands cut down skillfully with an axe. Verse 4. With silver and gold, silver and gold, silver and gold. With silver and gold, they decorate that tree, people. With nails and hammers, they strengthen it so that it does not totter. What's that make you think of? Let me read it again. For the customs of this people are vain. For the trees of the forest do their hands cut down skillfully with an axe. With silver and gold they decorate it. With nails and hammers they strengthen it so that it does not totter. Those who are on the side of the fence that allows Christ Mass, trees, will connect this verse with idols being made of those trees. Those who can read the actual Hebrew text know better, especially those who know their history. Idols made of trees that were tall enough to fall over were planted in the ground. They did not hold them up with hammer and nails. Let's talk about the fence. The Bible teaches us that every word that proceeds forth from the mouth of God is perfect, pure, and holy. But if we live according to the oral traditions, are we not at least in some cases, living by laws established by the mouth of men, which are not perfect, usually not pure, and never holy. I mean, you have to be repeating God's words for that to happen, right? The Bible teaches us that the Torah is perfect, pure, and holy, but some reject the law of God and say that they live by grace. There was a time when religious people, Jews and Gentiles, sat on a fence with, dare I say, the post planted deeply within the posterior of their anatomy. Let it sink in, you'll get it. But no one does that anymore. No, these days, religion has crossed over to the side of Baal. Baal is an idol that walks before the people, just like the little golden cow did at Sinai. Baal is an idol that likes everything we like. He dislikes everything we dislike. Baal condemns everyone who dares to cut us off in traffic while winking at us when we do it to someone else. Baal condemns everyone who steals from us, but winks, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, when we cheat on our taxes or when we don't turn in that cash we got under the table. Baal demands that everyone attend weekly service, but hey, he's winking at us when we decide to worship him at the lake or at home watching TV. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. How long will we fluctuate between the vain pagan traditions and obedience to Yahweh God, who neither winks nor nudges at our sin? Next, Eliyahu laid down a challenge. Let the prophets of Baalim build an altar and cry out to their gods to bring down fire. And he would do the same, of course, with Yahweh, his God. No one was allowed to start a fire, though. Both sides had to call on their God for the fire. The God had to do it. Thus, whomever's God responded would be the real God. The prophets of Baalim cried out to their gods first, but nothing happened. So they hopped. There's your word for limped. They limped around in a circle and cried out some more. Seeing this, Eliyahu mocked them and said, "Louder, boys, louder! Maybe your God's just busy. Maybe he's talking to somebody else. Maybe your gods have been detained. Maybe they're on a long journey. Or maybe they're asleep. Louder, boys, louder!" So the prophets cried out louder and began to cut themselves until they were covered in their own blood. I would say, yeah, how's that working out for you? But we all know. Well, as much fun as all that was, Eliyahu finally called the children of Yisrael closer to him. He fixed the altar and set up 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Yisrael. Then he commanded some people to fill 4 jars with water, the stuff they are all but out of, and then told them to pour it out over all that wood. Say, can I get a slurp of that before you? Oh, man. Yes, he made them fill all 4 jars and pour them out 3 different times. They used so much water that the trench he dug around the wood and all that stuff was filled up and overflowing. What a waste of the very thing we're all so desperate for in a time of drought. I sure hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Prophet Man. All right, we're picking back up with verse 36. And as the time of the offering ascended, Eliyahu, the Navi, the prophet, said, Yahweh God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yisrael, this day it will be known that you are God in Yisrael, and I am your servant, and by your words I have done all these things. And the fire came down, consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the 12 stones, and the dirt around the sacrifice, and then it lapped up all of that water in the trench. Then the children of Israel threw themselves on the ground with their faces in the dirt and cried out, Yahweh hu ha-Elohim, Yahweh hu ha-Elohim. Literally in English, it would be Yahweh, he the God, Yahweh, he the God. You know that's not exactly what it means, right? It's like saying Yahweh, he is God. Yahweh, he is the only God. When will the fire of Yahweh, God, come down and consume the sacrifice on the altar of our hearts? When will we climb back over that fence and follow the mitzvot of the living God? When will we cry out, Yahweh hu ha-Elohim, Yahweh hu ha-Elohim? 59. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, you know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It said by Torah observance were saved out of the flame. That's interesting. Like everyone else thus far, they achieved and or received nothing from God because of how special they were. No, no, no. They received something from God, one, either because it was God's will, and two, because all of them, at least over the majority of their lives, lived according to the Torah of God. Yes, they failed from time to time, but they just picked themselves back up, wiped the dust off, and got back on the path of Torah. Why? Because Yahweh hu ha-Elohim. Yahweh hu ha-Elohim. He also said Daniel, for his innocency, was delivered from the mouth of lions. On the night that Belshazzar died, Darius became the new king. He appointed 120 governors over Persia, who answered to 3 rulers. Daniel was one of the 3. The Bible tells us that Daniel far surpassed the other 2 rulers, and the king was actually thinking about making Daniel the boss over everyone. Kind of like Joseph. He was just going to run everything. So the other rulers and the governors got together to find a way to oust Daniel. They couldn't have that. Here's what the Jewish Study Bible said about it. It's Daniel 6:6. Those men said, we are not going to find any fault with Daniel unless we find something against him in connection with the laws of his God. You hear what they just said? That approach apparently didn't work because they had to get the new ruler to sign off on a new law so that Daniel would be in violation of it. They couldn't even make comparisons and find anything with Daniel's law. They had to make a new law. So the governors got the new ruler to sign off on a law forbidding people to pray to anyone but the king for the next 30 days. It was supposed to be a celebration of the king becoming king. Well, you know that boosted the new king's ego, so he signed off, not thinking about Daniel. In this time and place, the king actually didn't have the right to change his own laws if it was to show favoritism. Thus, the king had to let his governors throw Daniel, his favorite, in a pit with hungry lions. And as we all know, Daniel survived. But the governors, their wives, and their children were all thrown into that same pit, and they were all eaten. Here's what the Jewish Study Bible says about Daniel's innocence. It's 6:21. And he, we're speaking of King Darius, and he approached the den. He cried to Daniel in a mournful voice. The king said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, was the God whom you serve so regularly able to deliver you from the lions? Daniel then talked with the king O King, live forever. I'm trying not to be so emotional, but boy, I'm getting emotional over this. My God sent his messenger. Yeah, they wrote angel. That's Christianity in the Jewish Bible. My God sent his messengers, is what it should say, who shut up the mouths of the lions so that they did not injure me, inasmuch as I was found innocent by him. Nor have I, O King, done you any injury. Roll Shaggy. Was Mati. Yeah, right? Uh-oh. Verse 24. The king was very glad and ordered Daniel to be brought up out of the den. Daniel was brought up out of the den, and no injury was found on him, for he had been found innocent. Nope, that's not what it says. For he had trusted in his God. The text reads like Daniel thought he was saved because he was innocent. But innocent people have died for much less many times over the ages. However, verse 24 makes it abundantly clear why Daniel survived, but we will have to look at the actual Aramaic text to take the Hellenization out of the understanding. Specifically, let's take a look at the Aramaic words for the phrase, for he had trusted his God, since this is clearly the reason why Daniel was spared. The words in Aramaic are din, hemin, belahe, which literally mean because he was faithful in his God. Daniel was found innocent by God because he was Torah observant. Had he not been Torah observant, he would have either not prayed to Yahweh God at all, or he would have prayed to King Dariavesh. And where would that have left him when his adversaries accused him of something for which he was guilty? You guys see the difference? It's because he lived out the Torah that he had not committed a sin. Because he lived by the Torah that he was not guilty of some wrongdoing. That's what saved him. In the end, Daniel was not saved because he was innocent. He wasn't even saved because of his Torah observance. Daniel was saved because it was the will and plan of God in that time and place. Don't forget, right after this event, King Dariavesh made a law stating that Yahweh, the God of Daniel, was the one and only God to be served by the people of his kingdom. And you know good and well that was God's will. Verse 61, and thus consider you throughout all ages that none that put their trust in him shall be overcome. This verse bothers me more than all the others. All Matityahu did was find those who survived a particular event in their lives and then turned that into a very Hellenized idea that everyone who trusts in God is spared. Thus, those whose prayers are not answered simply did not have enough faith. Many of the people in Matityahu's own family met with an untimely death because of his actions. Many Rabbim and Kohanim, that's rabbis and priests, died just a few years later. Millions of Torah-observant Jews have died since. Their belief in God had nothing to do with their death. It is quite common to hear people say that God has a plan for their lives when they survive an event that takes the lives of others around them. I guess they haven't stopped to think that they are also implying that those who died did so because God had no plans for them. It's a horrible thing to say, but we hear it all the time. For example, a mass shooting, a car wreck, a plane crash, stuff like that. But most, if not all, of those people are not Torah observant, and I'm not sure you could find even one who is actually innocent before God. I just don't think that's possible. The truth is, people who survive accidents do so because God created the laws of physics. They survived that car wreck because of where they were sitting, how much they weigh, The amount of speed the car was traveling, the angle, the trajectory, and velocity, to name just a few factors that determine life and death, none of which factor into God's plans except on the very rare times throughout history when they did. Matityahu only found 11 examples: Abraham, Joseph, Phinehas, Yehoshua, Caleb, David, Eliyahu, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel. And he went from one end of the Bible to the other to do so. How many can you find beyond that? Verse 62 says, "Fear not then the words of the non-Torah observant, the sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms." Boy, he's right about that. But so was his. Everybody dies and turns to dirt, people. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he is returned into his dust, and his thought is come to nothing. Wherefore you, my sons, be valiant, and show yourselves men on behalf of the Torah. For by it, Torah observance, shall you obtain glory. And behold, I know that your brother Shimon is a man of counsel. Give ear to him always, he shall be a father to you. As for Yehuda Maccabee, he has been mighty and strong. Even from his youth, let him be your captain, and fight the battle of the people. Take also to you all those that observe the Torah, and avenge you the wrong of your people. Recompense fully the non-Jews, and take heed to the commandments of the Torah. So he blessed them, and it says he was gathered to his father, so it means he died. And he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchres of his fathers at Modin, or Modane, and all Israel made great lamentation for him. All right. That gets us through chapter 2. Same time, same place next Saturday. Y'all don't forget to pray for me. Shabbat Shalom.